Hey everyone, Nathan from Matia here. I want to show you our brand new Terraform provider. What you see on the screen in front of you is the GitHub page for it. It is fully open source. You can check out all of the code, how it functions right there in front of you. It is, of course, also published to the Terraform registry. I'm going to assume that you have a little bit of experience with Terraform. You're probably not looking at this video if you're not already interested in infrastructure as code to some level. So I'm going to skip over a couple of the basics and I'm going to jump right into a demo project here. I'm more interested in showing you how to use the Terraform provider that Matia has released as opposed to using Terraform itself. So let's hop over to VS Code real quick. I have a couple projects here. I've got one that's MySQL to BigQuery. The one I'm going to show you in this video is Postgres-to-Snowflake. This is broken out into a bunch of different files to make it really easy to see what's going on. So let's walk through this provider and just a little bit of the Terraform setup as well. You can see that we have our basic entry file here. We're using Terraform. We've got the required versions, and we have the Matia provider here. We are on version 0.1 currently. As I mentioned, it is brand new, but expect a lot of updates to this in the future. We also have Terraform variables. I set this up in a very idiomatic way for Terraform. I broke out all of the variables into their own individual variables that we can use. This is an example file. These are the definitions for all of these. Follow your own best practices for however you're managing this within your own infrastructure as code projects. This is just for this example, of course. Perhaps this is too verbose for what you're doing. Perhaps this isn't enough for what you're doing and you want to use a secrets manager. By all means, go ahead and use those. Here I've set up the actual variables, the API token for my tenant, the URL for the Matia API. However, this is currently optional. This is the only endpoint that we have, so it is the default endpoint in the provider. Some basic Postgres connection information, as well as some basic Snowflake connection information. For the security-minded out there, all of this information is fake information. It will not work. Feel free to copy and paste it, but you're not going to get anywhere. We also have all of the other definitions for this particular project. In order to build a pipeline within Matia, you need to define a source. You need to define a destination. Those are basically assets that live within your data catalog. Then you're going to define an integration. The integration itself is where you set the schedule and what's going to happen. So let's take a look at the source first. Very simple source. We have the resource as Matia source. Remember this naming convention, Matia underscore source. We're going to call it, it's a Postgres database. We're going to call it TF example source Postgres so that it's very easy to see within the UI and we can jump right out at it. Then we have our connection config and our connection secrets. The difference here, I think, is pretty obvious. The configuration is all of the non-sensitive stuff. The connection secrets are the sensitive things. As I mentioned, we're using variables for everything. So you can see that we have the host name, the port, the database, the username, password, all of that's coming directly from our variables. You'll see the same thing is true for our destination. This looks almost exactly the same. Remember that naming convention. Instead of Matia underscore source, we now have Matia underscore destination. It is Snowflake. Here's our name for it. The same connection configuration, the same connection secrets, the same use of variables within Terraform. This is important because we've tried very, very hard to follow this standard pattern so that it doesn't matter what your source database is or what SaaS application you're trying to connect to for that data pipeline. Maybe it's Google Ads, maybe it's Google Sheets, maybe it's another Snowflake database. There's all sorts that Matia supports, and they're all going to follow the exact same configuration pattern within Terraform, which makes it very easy for your engineering team to manage all of this data pipeline infrastructure within Matia. Now, that said, let's take a look at the integration. It is a little bit more complicated. So we have the same naming convention here, Matia underscore integration, as opposed to Matia underscore source or destination. We're pulling that source and destination that we defined earlier. We're pulling the Postgres ID and the Snowflake ID, so those connections are automatically made behind the scenes. We're giving it a name, of course. And then we have all of these different settings that are going to vary a little bit depending on what that actual integration is. For this, I'm using Postgres, so I want to make sure that I'm using CDC to basically do near real-time updates as best we can. And I want 4 connections for that. So we have 4 maximum clients, and the incremental mode is change stream, which is CDC for Postgres. Then we set the schedule. Again, that same naming convention, Matia _ integration schedule. It's our Postgres-to-Snowflake integration. We're grabbing that ID that we created before. And for this particular setup, I'm going to set the replication frequency to manual. You can come in here and set it to an interval. You can also set it to a cron schedule. Personally, when I'm working with this type of stuff, I prefer to do it manual so that when I do my apply, it's not immediately moving data. I have the opportunity to check it within the UI, at least for the first go, just to make sure that I'm comfortable with the new provider and I've configured it correctly. Of course, follow your own best practices internally for how you handle those. Lastly, we have Matia integration schema. This defines what we're going to sync between those databases. And so in this case, we're going to grab the public schema and we're going to take the users table and we're going to move the users table from Postgres to Snowflake. Hopefully that makes sense. That was a really quick look. If you're not familiar with Terraform, if you go to the Terraform website, they have fantastic tutorials. I would encourage you to take an afternoon and dive into a bunch of them. Infrastructure as code and Terraform in particular are fantastic. Now that we've looked at all this, let's take a look at what actually happens when we run it. First, we're going to go to the correct directory. Then we're going to run Terraform plan, excuse me. This shows us exactly what's going to happen when the plan runs. In this case, you can see the green pluses next to everything. I don't have any of this configured within my Matia tenant already, so all of this is going to be created. It is going to add 5, nothing to change, nothing to remove. I'm already confident with this. I'm going to go ahead and run Terraform apply. Yes, I want to do this. Off it goes. It creates the destination, creates the source, creates the integration, creates the schedule, sets the schema. There we go. Let's go check it out. So this was the starting screen. These were my integrations. As I mentioned, there's a fresh tenant. I didn't have anything configured already. Let's refresh that. Once it comes up, boom, we can see that we have our Terraform example, Postgres to Snowflake. We're syncing from that Postgres database over to Snowflake. It was created by the API. And if we come in here and take a look, we're grabbing our users table and we have the trigger type set to manual. Everything is exactly how we configured it within Terraform. The reason this is so important is when you're managing your data pipelines, it's often very helpful to manage everything in the same place that you're managing your databases as well. If you're going to deploy a new database or you're going to build out a new schema and you're already using infrastructure as code for that, then you can build this right into your workflow. That table, those new databases, that new schema, whatever it might be, will automatically sync the next time you deploy your infrastructure. This also gives you all of the Git history behind it, all of your source control. You can do Git blame. You can jump back in and say, hey, why did this particular API call change the trigger type from manual to an interval of 1 hour? Well, if you're using infrastructure as code, you can go back and you can look at the actual commit that made that change. You can see when it ran, and hopefully you've got some sort of software development lifecycle, some good practices built in there where you can relate that commit back to a pull request, back to a ticket of some kind, and you can trace that all the way back. That's your very brief demo of Terraform. Thank you so much for watching it with me. I hope you get a chance to try it out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.